Curtis Jett was a hired hand for the Hargis Faction of the Hargis-Cockrill Feud. There were many deaths associated with this feud, and members of the two factions would go to court several times against each other. Curtis Jett and Thomas White were the two men that stood out the most of all the feuders in the conflict. We have chosen Curtis Jett to feature as the outlaw of this feud because he would go on to kill more men after he was pardoned by the Kentucky governor. Come along with us as we walk through the life of Curtis F. Jett, the mad dog of the mountains. All aboard the Kentucky-Tennessee Living Time Machine. Please fasten your seatbelts and keep your arms and legs inside of the vehicle at all times. But to get going, we need your help. We still need to fire up that time machine to transport us. Please help us by clicking on the like, subscribe, and bell notification buttons down below. Not only does this fire up the time machine, but it convinces YouTube that we need a bigger time machine to reach more people who love history as much as you do. Now, back to our story. Early life. Because there are two Curtis Jetts in the bloody Breathitt County feuds, it is important to make a distinction between the two men. Curt Jett Sr. was the grandfather of Curt F. Jett. In the mountains, it is not unusual for a name to be given to one generation, skip a generation, and then be given to the next generation. It is also very commonplace for the grandfather to have Senior after his name and the grandson to have Junior after his name. So let's break the Jett family tree down a little, shall we? Curtis F. Jett was born on December 19, 1874, in Jackson, Kentucky, to Hiram and Sarah Jane Swall Jett. He would have two siblings by the name of Joanna Swall Tipton and William Swall. He would have several half-siblings. They were Alexander Hamilton Hargis, James Henderson Hargis, Nanny Hargis Crawford, and Louisa Hargis South, John G. Hargis, Samuel Hargis, Elbert S. Hargis, and Benjamin Hargis. Curtis would marry 3 times. His wives were Regina Reynolds Jett, married in 1898, Alice Cleveland Cox Park Hall Sams, married in 1921, and Julina Weber Abner, married in 1926. Curtis would have one child named Benjamin Carlisle Jett. Hiram Jett's father was Curtis Jett Sr. According to Judge James Hargis in his interview about the Jett-Little feud, both Curtis Jett Sr. and Hiram would make a failed attempt to kill Bad Jerry Little. This was the only event of the feud that we could find both men listed. The nickname. We have found a couple of cases where Curtis Jett would be called Wild Dog or Mad Dog. We were kind of confused by this nickname because there were very few sources for the reason behind it. We will give one of the most common articles that hit the newspapers of the time concerning this issue. According to the Hartford Republican, quote, in jail in Louisville, under the sentence of life imprisonment for the Marcum murder and under sentence of death for the murder of Jim Cockrill is Curtis Jett, dissolute nephew of James Hargis, known in Jackson as Wild Dog, who swaggered about in the streets with a large revolver at his belt and glorified in being known as a dangerous man, unquote. While there would be 3 deaths that Jett would confess to either having killed or having helped to plot their deaths, he would only go to trial for 2 of them. We will get more into all of the plots and actual trials during the Hargis-Cockrill Feud series. However, we will briefly touch upon these for this story. Dr. B. H. Cox. While the murder of Dr. Cox is not laid at the feet of Curtis Jett, in 1906, during his confession, Jett would confess to being a participant in the plot, although he was never charged for the crime. Here is a summary of what the Washington Times has to say about the death of Dr. Cox. Not even 30 minutes before his death, Dr. Cox stood at the foot of the steps to his office and told a friend that he felt that the signs were giving a bad omen of a killing that night. However, a call came for the doctor, and ignoring the signs around him, Dr. Cox grabbed his satchel and walked down the steps and onto the street without a thought. After taking 6 steps, a shot rang out in the Jackson, Kentucky air, and Doc fell dead on the street. There were a couple of reasons listed for his making the list of men to be killed. One was that he married a sister of Jerry Caldwell. Cardwell had killed a Hargis. Second, he was also a guardian for the Cockrill boys, and Tom had killed a Hargis. And third, he had went on the streets at night, ignoring basic mountaineer caution. It is unclear of the plot to kill Dr. Cox, if any, that Jett had to play. Although he never explained his part, he did admit to participating in the plot. James Cockrill. At the time of his death, James Jim Cockrill was the town marshal. There was a contested election for the seats of county judge and sheriff of Breathitt County. Things got heated during the depositions of the contested cases, and a fight ensued. Warrants had been issued by City Judge T. P. Caldwell, Jr. for the county judge, Jim Hargis, and J. B. Marcum, lawyer for the Republican contestants for the places held by the county judge Hargis and Sheriff Ed Callahan. Hargis refused to serve the warrants, and Jim Cockrill, the town marshal, backed by his brother Tom, drew their pistols and forced the issue. Tom Cockrill would receive 2 bullet wounds in the saloon sometime after this happened in a pistol fight. Ben Hargis was mortally wounded and died shortly after the gunfight at his home. On July 29, 1902, near the courthouse in Jackson, Kentucky, James Cockrill would be shot to death by Curtis F. Jett. Curtis would be taken into custody and brought before a jury. According to the New York Times, quote, Cynthiana, Kentucky, September 22nd, Curtis Jett, after a trial lasting 8 days, has been declared guilty of murdering Town Marshal Thomas Cockrill at Jackson, Kentucky, July 21, 1902. The jury, bringing in the verdict, had the right to fix punishment at life imprisonment or death, and gave the latter verdict, unquote. It was not that unusual for names of family members to be mixed up when their deaths or other traumatic events took place over a short span of time together. Jett would not remain in jail long. According to the website article, Curtis Jett, the Wild Dog of the Mountains, quote, Curtis Jett was a member of the Hargis clan in the Hargis-Cockrill Feud. Once he was under the sentence of death, but the Kentucky Court of Appeals reversed the verdict, and he accepted a life term without appeal. That was for the killing of James Cockrill, July 20th, 1902, near the courthouse at Jackson. He claimed an alibi, declaring he was in the Hargis store down the street. Cockrill was shot from the courthouse window, unquote. Curtis Jett would later give a full confession of the murder of James Cockrill as well as others. But he would use the excuse that he was at the Hargis store to get a pardon from the governor of the state of Kentucky. This caused much upset in the county, and the Republican Party of the time would use this as a rally cry against the governor in their next election. But for the time being, Jett would sit in jail while awaiting word for his release, as told by the newspapers. According to the Evening Bulletin, quote, Governor Beckham has pardoned Curtis Jett just once. And then James Marcum, whom Jett afterwards assassinated, recommended the pardon, unquote. This would not be the only time that Jett would face charges concerning the death of James Cockrill. He would again see the inside of a courtroom after the death of attorney J. B. Marcum. But these articles also confused us a bit. There are laws, even back then, against double jeopardy. Could it be that the wording of this article was mistaken? That Jett was pardoned by the governor for the death of James Cockrill, and that he would face charges for the death of Marcum? Or did the trials go back to back? This is our understanding of these events, and if we are mistaken, please comment down below. James Cockrill was slain. Curtis Jett faced charges and had the death penalty placed upon him. His sentence was commuted by the Court of Appeals, and he was then released and pardoned by the governor of the state of Kentucky. After his release, he then killed Marcum a year later in 1903. He then went to trial for the death of Marcum, and the courts reinstated his sentence for the death of James Cockrill. It is ironic if Marcum pursued the cause for Jett to have him pardoned by the governor, only to be killed by him. However, from what we can gather, from this point forward, Jett does serve his time under the charges of both murders. Attorney J.B. Marcum. On May 4, 1903, Curtis Jett and Tom White shot James B. Marcum to death in the doorway of the courthouse in Jackson, Kentucky. Marcum was a prominent local attorney, trustee for the University of Kentucky, and a Republican leader in Breathitt County. Jett would claim that he was drunk for the reason that he would kill Marcum, but according to the testimony at court, it was because he was a hired man to kill him. B.F. French, leader of the French faction of the French-Eversole feud, would be acting attorney on the side of Curtis Jett and Tom White. It seems that he was hired by Hargis brothers and Ed Callahan to defend the pair. French would be a co-defendant in the landmark case brought by the widow Marcum. According to the Hartford Republican, quote, that Jett and White murdered Mr. Marcum for hire is not doubted by anyone who believes the testimony on which the two men were convicted. That they were hired by men who believe themselves immune from punishment in the courts of bloody Breathitt is believed by a majority of those who are familiar with the affairs in Jackson, unquote. As we have been covering the Appalachian feuds and outlaws for most of this past year, we can understand why everyone felt that there was no true justice in the mountains. It seemed that as soon as everyone who was feuding went to court for the murder of someone, that he would soon be released out of jail and would be back at it again shortly afterward. Some of these men would rack up over 50 or more kills to their name due to this revolving door policy. Curtis Jett, Confessions and Death. According to the Brownsville Daily Herald, on June 11, 1906, while sitting in the Cynthiana jail while awaiting his second trial on the charge of James Cockrell, he made a full confession. He spoke of the assassinations of Dr. B. H. Cox, James Cockrell, and James B. Marcum. During his confession, he also confirmed that B. W. Ewen was telling the truth in his testimony. His uncle, Samuel Jett, who was prosecuting attorney against Jett, declined to confirm or deny Curtis's confession. According to the Bluegrass Blade, sometime in April of 1908, with the help of a lady from Lexington, Kentucky, Jett had been convinced to confess all of his sins and convert to Christianity. There is some speculation that this may be a ruse upon Jett's part in the article. However, the article does admit that it really cannot judge for sure the circumstances of his heart. He would go on to get a certificate from the International Sunday School League, which gave him the authority to teach Sunday school. He was very proud of this accomplishment. It is also said by the Reverend Joseph Severance, the prison chaplain, that Jett was one of the best Bible scholars that he had ever encountered. According to the website Curtis Jett, the Wild Dog of the Mountains, quote, Jett has been a model prisoner, leader of the Christian Endeavor, and right-hand man of the chaplain Walter Q. Verland. In the night school, Jett was a leader. He was the oldest prisoner in point of service and the best. Not only is his record perfect, but he has assisted the prison authorities in maintaining discipline by establishing a sort of public sentiment inside of the prison in favor of good order, unquote. He was up for parole, and ministers, women's organizations, his uncle Whit Jett, and Judge Alex Hargis also came to urge the parole board to grant clemency. In December of 1918, he was granted his release and became a preacher, and would never kill again for the rest of his days. Curtis F. Jett would die on February 3, 1956, at the age of 80 years old in Richmond, Kentucky. He would be buried at the Doylesville Cemetery in Doylesville, Kentucky. Thank you. We at Kentucky Tennessee Living would like to thank you for watching our video series on the Appalachian Outlaws. Don't forget to hit that like button, as the more likes we receive, the more likely YouTube is to suggest our videos to other viewers. Also, to receive notice when we upload a new video, be sure to subscribe and click the bell notification button. We thank you for continuing to support Kentucky Tennessee Living as we are discovering the mysteries of Appalachian history.